In October of 1968, on an 80-acre Blue Ridge foothill hillside 4 miles outside Burnsville, North Carolina, in Yancey County, a 31-year-old widow named Ruthie Whitaker paid $200 in cash for 40 heritage American guinea hogs from an elderly Watauga County breeder named Eldridge Caudle, who had been carrying the foundation lines of a working guinea hog herd continuously since 1946 on a small 40-acre farm outside the town of Sugar Grove. The 40 heritage hogs were the working surplus from Eldridge Caudle's autumn 1968 herd assessment. Eldridge Caudle had offered them to Ruthie Whitaker on the morning of the third Saturday of October, 1968, at a price of $6 per breeding sow for the 28 breeding sows, $8 per breeding boar for the 4 breeding boars, $3 per weanling gilt for the 6 weanling gilts, and $3 per weanling barrow for the 2 weanling barrows. Ruthie Whitaker had paid in cash, in a folded brown paper envelope she had been keeping in a tin coffee canister on the kitchen shelf since the spring of 1967, when her husband, Bertram Whitaker, had been killed at 36 by a lumber mill saw carriage accident at the Carolina Mountain Lumber Company plant in Spruce Pine. The 40 heritage hogs stood on the afternoon of October 19, 1968, in the back of a borrowed 2-axle stock trailer hitched to her 1964 Chevrolet C20 pickup truck. The lead breeding sow, a deep jet black 4-year-old Eldridge Caudle had named Hannah, weighed approximately 210 pounds. The largest of the 4 breeding boars weighed approximately 260 pounds. The smallest of the weanling gilts weighed approximately 48 pounds. They were, by every measurable standard, the North Carolina commercial hog industry used in 1968, the wrong animals for a working farm operation. The men at the Burnsville Cafe laughed for an hour and 55 minutes when they heard. They were still laughing 5.5 years later, on the morning of February the 22nd, 1974, when the United States Department of Agriculture Cooperative Extension Service in Raleigh released an emergency advisory bulletin confirming that the commercial hog feed cost crisis caused by the combined effects of the 1972 Soviet wheat purchase grain stock drawdown and the June 1973 Nixon soybean embargo had pushed commercial Yorkshire Duroc confinement hog feed costs past the break-even point on the regional commodity hog price. That emergency liquidation culling of breeding sows had begun across western North Carolina commercial confinement operations at 12 cents per pound dressed weight, and that the 1974 commercial confinement hog inventory was projected to come in at 63% of the 1972 baseline by the third quarter of the year. By the autumn of 1968, the agricultural orthodoxy of the American commercial hog industry had reached the cleanest expression of its 40-year arc. The orthodoxy was simple. Commercial hogs produced dressed weight for the regional and national retail grocery market on a confinement housing protocol that had progressively replaced traditional woods pannage feeding across the southern Appalachian and Midwestern hog belt between approximately 1948 and 1965. The accepted commercial hog breeds in 1968 were, in this order, the Yorkshire Duroc Hampshire Landrace, crossbred commercial hybrid for the dominant national wholesale share, the registered Yorkshire White Hog for the highest reproductive performance, and the registered Duroc Red Hog for the highest meat-to-fat ratio. The standard commercial hog operation in 1968 ran between 200 and 1,000 head in long, low-roofed concrete floor confinement sheds, with stainless steel automatic feeders pulling from tall on-site feed bins continuously refilled by commercial feed trucks on a 14-day delivery cycle. The feed protocol in 1968 ran on shelled corn at 68% of the ration, soybean meal at 24%, mineral and vitamin premix at 6%, and limestone and salt at 2%. The standard commercial finishing hog reached market weight of 240 pounds at 22 weeks on a feed conversion ratio of 3.1 pounds of feed per pound of live weight. The heritage breeds, American Guinea Hog, Choctaw, Ossabaw Island, Mulefoot, Red Wattle, Tamworth, Gloucestershire, Old Spot, produced lighter live weights of approximately 180 to 240 pounds at 34 to 42 weeks on a feed conversion ratio that was not directly comparable because the heritage breeds derived 70 to 90% of their dietary energy from foraged forest mast and pasture forage rather than from purchased commodity feed. They were in the professional consensus of every commercial hog operator in the Blue Ridge foothills, ornamental and historical curiosities. They were not commercial hogs. The North Carolina State University Cooperative Extension Service in 1968, run for Yancey County by a single swine science specialist named Webster Holcomb, who had served in the office for 15 years, said it openly to anyone who would listen. He said it standing at the front of the Yancey County Cattlemen and Hog Producers Association meeting. He said it sitting at the counter of the Burnsville Cafe at 7 in the morning. He said, Woods Panage hog production in 1968 is a turn-of-the-century practice. It is not a modern commercial protocol. The Whitaker widow has decided to honor her great-grandmother, who kept guinea hogs on Woods Panage in Hancock County, Tennessee, back when nobody had access to a modern commercial feed bin. Nobody should mistake the gesture for a business decision. It was not a controversial position. It was the professional consensus of the North Carolina State University Swine Science Department, of the Yancey County Cattlemen and Hog Producers Association, of every commercial confinement hog operator between Asheville and Boone. It was the consensus that the 40 heritage guinea hogs Ruthie Whitaker had bought from Eldridge Caudle in October of 1968 would either be sold off within 2 years at salvage prices to a hobby breeder, or would slowly transition into a hobby herd that would never generate working farm income while her Woods Panage hardwood forest woodlot sat unproductive and the regional wholesale buyers refused to handle small-frame guinea hog carcasses because the dressed weight would not pace the standard commercial pork belly and loin retail grade. Ruthie Whitaker had been raised on a different consensus. Her great-grandmother, Sally Caudle, had been born in 1858 in a small Hancock County, Tennessee hollow and ridge farm, where the Caudle Whitaker family had been keeping a working guinea hog herd on Woods Panage continuously since 1834, under the traditional Scotch-Irish Appalachian mountain farm tradition that valued the foraged forest mast as the foundation of the family hog economy. Sally Caudle had married Jefferson Whitaker in 1876 at the age of 18. She had kept a hand-bound farm journal continuously from the morning of her wedding day through the morning of her death in 1942 at the age of 84. The journal, titled in faded brown ink on the front board in her own hand-pressed lettering, Appalachian Goodwife's Receipts and Husbandry, contained 66 years of seasonal woods pannage foraged feeding records, hand-drawn anatomical diagrams of the guinea hog's digestive tract response to 23 different foraged forest mast and weed species, a complete monthly calendar of the Appalachian wild forage season from the early spring wild ramps and pokeweed shoots through the summer dock and comfrey and lamb's quarter and plantain, through the autumn hickory and chinkapin and white oak and red oak acorn, drop through the winter chestnut hull and persimmon and dry stored mast supplementation, and a single sentence Sally Caudle had written in 1923 to her granddaughter Maud Whitaker, and that Maud Whitaker had later transcribed onto the kitchen wall above the wood-burning cook stove of the Yancey County Whitaker home place in the spring of 1948, when Ruthie was 11 years old. Great-granddaughter, when the commercial feed bins run dry, the day will come when the family will need the old hardwood forest woodlot again. Sally Caudle's hand-bound journal had passed to Ruthie's grandmother Maud Whitaker, who had passed it to Ruthie's mother, Iva Whitaker, who had passed it to Ruthie in the spring of 1967, when Iva had moved into an Asheville assisted living facility. Ruthie had read the journal 3 times in the winter of 1967 to 1968. She had been 30 years old. She had been widowed since the spring of 1967. She had been raising her son Jubal, 8 years old, in the autumn of 1968, and managing the home place with the help of a part-time hired man named Thaddeus Norton for 18 consecutive months, before she decided what her great-grandmother Sally had been writing in the journal for 66 years. The commercial confinement feed protocol was building its own collapse. By the summer of 1968, she had decided that she would acquire the 40 heritage guinea hogs. She had told no one in Yancey County what she was planning. By the morning of the 4th Sunday of October 1968, when Cleveland Sutphin drove past the Whitaker Hardwood Forest woodlot on his way home from the Burnsville First Baptist Church and saw 40 jet-black guinea hogs rooting in the leaf-litter floor of the lower hardwood section, the entire county had something new to talk about. By the second Tuesday of November 1968, every commercial hog operator in Yancey County had heard. The Burnsville Cafe sat on East Main Street between the bank of Yancey County and the Burnsville Town Hall, and on Tuesday and Friday mornings between 5:30 and 7, the long Formica counter filled with men in faded green Funks G hybrid seed ball caps and red plaid hunting caps, drinking coffee from chipped enamel mugs and arguing about the Tennessee River Valley commodity hog prices and the prospects for the autumn corn silage harvest, and the question of whether the new federal commodity support standards rumored for the 1973 season would shift the western North Carolina hog economy. The Whitaker widows' 40 guinea hogs had become the dominant topic of conversation by the second week of November. Cleveland Sutphin had told the story at the counter 4 mornings in a row. He had told it again at the November Yancey County Cattlemen and Hog Producers Association meeting. He had told it once more at the First Baptist Church coffee hour on the second Sunday of November. By the end of November, he had told it in some form to every commercial confinement hog operator within 40 miles of Burnsville. The story changed slightly with each telling. The mockery in Burnsville was not cruel. It was a kind of small-town disbelief that wore the clothing of concern. At the feed mill on Wednesday afternoon, Ruthie heard a man named Hosea Green, who had bought weanling pigs off her father Caleb Whitaker in the 1950s, tell another customer that the Whitaker widow had let her grief get the better of her judgment. At the Bank of Yancey County on the Saturday before Thanksgiving, the bank manager pulled Ruthie aside after she had finished a routine deposit and asked her, in a low and respectful voice, whether she had thought through what the per-head dressed weight commodity price of a small guinea hog carcass was going to do to her household budget over the next 5 years. At the First Baptist Church potluck on the third Sunday of November, the minister's wife pulled Ruthie aside in the basement fellowship hall and asked her, in a careful voice, whether the guinea hogs were something Bertram would have approved of. Ruthie had looked at the minister's wife across the corner of a folding card table that held a covered casserole and a glass pan of dried apple stack cake, and had said, "Bertram would have asked me what my great-grandmother thought." The minister's wife had said nothing. Ruthie had carried her green bean casserole back to the kitchen and washed her own dish. The mockery did not stay in Burnsville. By the second week of November, the story had traveled, in the way all western North Carolina news traveled in 1968, by way of 3-cent newspaper classifieds and feed mill counter conversation and a single Bank of Yancey County teller who lived in Spruce Pine and rode the morning bus past the Whitaker farm on her way to work. By the third week of November, the story had reached the offices of the North Carolina Department of Agriculture in Raleigh, where a junior swine economics staffer named Cornelius Tisdale filed a single-typed memorandum into the Yancey County Hog Operations folder, noting that the registered widow of the late Bertram Whitaker had moved an 80-acre commercial hog operation onto an unrecognized woods pannage feeding program, and recommending that the file be reviewed again in 18 months for what he described in the memorandum as a likely operational failure or voluntary sale. The memorandum sat in a tan manila folder on a metal filing cabinet on the 4th floor of the Agriculture Building in Raleigh for the next 6 years. Cornelius Tisdale was promoted to senior swine economics staffer in 1972 and did not pull the file again until April of 1974, 6 weeks after the regional commercial hog emergency liquidation crisis had been documented. He removed the 1968 memorandum, stapled it to the front of a newly typed summary of the Whitaker operation's untouched March 1974 herd inventory of 110 head and the just-signed Atlanta charcuterie supply contract, walked the file to the State Commissioner of Agriculture's office, and left it on the commissioner's desk with a yellow Post-it note that said, in his small, careful handwriting, "I was wrong. The state was wrong. Read this." The commissioner read it. The 1975 North Carolina Department of Agriculture Annual Report carried a 6-page case study on the Whitaker operation under the heading The Quiet Hollow. At the end of the Black Mountain Ridge, the case study was written by Cornelius Tisdale. It is still in the North Carolina Department of Agriculture archive in Raleigh. Cleveland Sutphin was 59 years old in the autumn of 1968. He was stocky and barrel-chested. His face had gone ruddy from decades of working concrete floor confinement sheds with 240 Yorkshire Duroc commercial hogs inside at a time. His brown and gray stubble flecked his cheeks and jaw. His deep-set blue eyes were squinted from years of inspecting flockhouse lighting. He wore a faded green Funks G hybrid seed ball cap with a stained brim, a faded brown Carhartt canvas chore coat over a tan twill button-down work shirt, dark blue Wrangler jeans softened by years of washes, and scuffed knee-high black rubber barn boots. His mouth had the paternalistic, worried set of a man who had spent his whole life believing he was responsible for other people's decisions. He had wanted the Whitaker 80 acres before Bertram died. He had wanted it more after. He had approached the subject sideways for 1 year. He had stopped by on Sunday afternoons. He had brought hot dish casseroles his wife Tibby made. He had told her more than once that any decision she wanted to make about the operation would have his full support. The guinea hogs changed the conversation. Cleveland heard about them from his hired man Stanley Goodnight, who had been at the Eldridge Caudle Dispersal on the third Saturday of October 1968, and had watched Ruthie pay in cash. Stanley had told Cleveland at the feed mill on the Monday morning. Cleveland had not believed him. Cleveland had driven past the Whitaker woodlot himself on the Tuesday afternoon and had counted, by the rough estimate of a man who had run a commercial 240 head Yorkshire Duroc confinement operation for 23 years. 40 unmistakably small jet-black guinea hogs rooting in the leaf litter under the lower hardwood section. Cleveland had driven home to his wife Tibby at 6 in the evening and had sat at the kitchen table with his cap off and his elbows on the oilcloth and had said, "Tibby, my neighbor's widow has lost her mind." Tibby Sutphin had set down a coffee pot and had said, "Cleveland, you do not call her that ever again. She is Bertram's widow, and she is your godson's mother, and she is 31 years old, and she has buried a husband and her father, and is running the home place while her mother is in the Asheville Assisted Living Facility. You will go over there tomorrow, and you will ask her what she has done, and you will listen to the answer." Cleveland Sutphin had gone over the next morning. Ruthie was standing in the lower woodlot beside the lead breeding sow with a small leather tally book in her left hand and a pencil in her right when she heard Cleveland Sutphin's truck pull up to the lane. She did not turn around. She finished the entry she was writing. She closed the tally book. She walked across the leaf-litter forest floor to the split-rail fence at the gate. "Cleveland, Ruthie, you want coffee?" No. She had expected the visit, although not on this particular Wednesday. She crossed her arms. She waited. "Stanley told me yesterday," Cleveland said. "I came over today. I drove past the lower woodlot yesterday, and I counted 40 guinea hogs rooting in the leaf litter under the hardwood section. I came home, and I asked Tibby to set me straight." "Tibby told me to come ask you. Ruthie, what in God's name have you done?" "I bought 40 Heritage American guinea hogs from Eldridge Caudle's Sugar Grove operation on Saturday. 28 breeding sows, 4 breeding boars, 6 weanling gilts, and 2 weanling barrows. I paid $200 in cash. They are going to be the foundation of a closed woods panage hog operation running on the old Caudle family hardwood forest forage protocol. I am going to direct market the dressed hogs to specialty buyers as soon as the production scales. I am not contracting to the regional commodity packing house. I am not selling into the wholesale Yorkshire Duroc retail grocery chain. I am running a closed guinea hog woods panage operation on a heritage breed direct market program. Ruthie, Cleveland, you cannot run a commercial hog operation on guinea hogs in 1968. The North Carolina State University Swine Science Department has no published commercial production data on a guinea hog woods pannage protocol. The Yancey County Cattlemen and Hog Producers Association has no working subcommittee on heritage breed forage. The Regional Commodity Packing House wants standard-dressed Yorkshire Duroc carcasses at standard weights and standard volume. You are going to be sitting on small-frame guinea hogs you cannot move and woods pannage acreage you cannot scale. By the autumn of 1970, you are going to be selling the 40 head at salvage prices to a hobby breeder, and you are going to be coming to me to ask if I will buy the home place when it happens. Ruthie, Cleveland. My great-grandmother wrote in 1923 that the day would come when the commercial feed bins would run dry, and that the only operations standing would be the ones that had kept the old hardwood forest woodlot. The day is closer than you think. The commercial confinement hog operations are running on an imported soybean and domestic corn feed protocol that is one large international grain purchase event, away from a complete cost structure collapse. The Soviet Union has been quietly purchasing American hard red winter wheat through the New York commodity exchanges since 1965, and the volume is going to triple inside the next 4 years. When it does, the commercial confinement operations across this Southeast are going to be looking at a feed cost spike that the regional commodity hog price cannot absorb. The only operations in this region that are going to be standing are the ones that do not depend on the purchased grain feed protocol. I am not going to be sitting on my hands when that happens. I am going to be the only Yancey County operator running on the right protocol. I am not asking you to understand this. I am telling you what I am doing so you do not have to ask me again. Cleveland Sutphin took his cap off, then put it back on, then took it off again. He looked across the split rail fence at the 40 jet-black guinea hogs rooting in the leaf litter under the lower hardwood section. He looked back at Ruthie. He said, "Ruthie, I cannot stop you. I cannot help you. I am going home. I will watch what happens." He drove home. If you have ever raised a breed everybody in your county had decided was a hobby animal, if you have ever heard your great-grandmother's voice in a 1923 Farm Journal entry and decided to listen to her over every cooperative extension agent and every commercial hog operator in your state, this story is for you. Stay with us. There is one of these stories in every county in America, and the one we are telling you today comes from Yancey County, North Carolina, in the late winter of 1974. 5.5 years after Ruthie Whitaker walked 40 heritage American guinea hogs off a borrowed stock trailer onto a Blue Ridge foothill hardwood forest woodlot. The years between 1968 and 1974 were the deep work years. They were the years in which Ruthie Whitaker did 3 things at the same time. She ran an 80-acre Blue Ridge foothill heritage hog operation. She translated a 66-year hand-bound Appalachian Farm Journal into operational protocol. And she did it while raising a young son alone in a county where the agricultural professional class had decided in advance that her operation would fail. The work was not glamorous. The work was on the morning of November 27, 1968. The hand-shoveling of a fresh autumn leaf litter mound onto the south slope farrowing shelter bedding at the temperature of -2 degrees Fahrenheit, while 3 pregnant guinea hog sows waited inside the heated lower shelter for their morning supplementary ration of cracked corn and stored summer-dried lamb's quarter and comfrey. The work was, on the evening of February 9th, 1969, the hand-stitching of a torn left shoulder seam on her faded charcoal gray chambray workshirt at the kitchen table by the light of a single overhead bulb after a 14-hour day. The work was, on the morning of March 19th, 1969, the kneeling for 3 hours and 10 minutes in fresh, clean wheat straw bedding beside the first farrowing sow Hannah to attend a difficult delivery of 9 small jet-black guinea hog piglets which Ruthie named when the last piglet stood up on its small wet legs at 4:42 in the afternoon and walked under its mother's belly to nurse, Sally, after her great-grandmother. The work was, in the autumn of 1970, the careful mapping of the 80-acre home woodlot into 8 rotational woods pannage quadrants of approximately 7.5 acres each, with hand-cut locust post split rail, movable fencing that Ruthie and Thaddeus Norton could rotate through the woodlot on an approximately 4-week summer cycle and a 6-week autumn mast cycle, so that the guinea hogs rooted fresh forage in a different section every rotational interval without depleting the leaf litter forage layer in any one place. The rotational woods pannage protocol was, in operating practice, the operational innovation that converted the traditional 1881 Appalachian stationary pannage protocol from her great-grandmother Sally Caudle's hand-bound journal into a working 80-acre commercial-scale rotational system. The Whitaker rotational pannage design was eventually documented by Dr. Lavinia Crockett at North Carolina State University in a 1976 peer-reviewed paper that is still the founding reference for the modern commercial heritage hog woods pannage literature. The mechanism was simple in retrospect and had been documented across 66 years of seasonal entries in Sally Caudle's hand-bound journal. The American guinea hog, on the natural rotational woods pannage protocol, derived approximately 75% of its dietary energy from hickory mast and white oak and red oak and chinkapin acorns through the autumn and winter, approximately 15% from foraged summer weeds, pokeweed shoots in late spring, lamb's quarter, and dock and plantain and comfrey through the summer, wild ramps in the early spring, persimmon and pawpaw in late summer, and approximately 10% from supplementary cracked corn and dry stored mast through the late winter finishing window. The total purchased feed cost per head in 1968 was approximately $8 per head per year against the standard commercial Yorkshire Duroc confinement cost per head in 1968 of approximately $60 per head per year. On a purchased feed cost per head basis, the Whitaker operation was running at 13% of the commercial confinement cost per head. By the autumn of 1971, the Whitaker operation had grown the breeding herd from 40 guinea hogs to 72 through 3 consecutive years of natural farrowing increase. By the autumn of 1972, the Whitaker operation had grown the breeding herd to 96. By the autumn of 1973, the Whitaker operation had grown the breeding herd to 108. The annual dressed weight production was running at approximately 14,000 pounds in 1972, 18,000 pounds in 1973, and 22,000 pounds in 1974. Ruthie sold the dressed guinea hog carcasses through a small Asheville and Boone direct market network at prices ranging from $2.10 per pound to $2.50 per pound between 1969 and 1972 against the commercial Yorkshire Duroc dressed weight commodity price during the same period of approximately 45 to 55 cents per pound. She had been keeping the operation ledger in a small green hardback Borum and Pease accounting book on the second shelf of the farmhouse pantry. She had reconciled it on the kitchen table on the third Sunday of every month at 6 in the evening with a sharpened number 2 pencil and a hand-cranked Monroe adding machine her father Caleb Whitaker had bought for the farm operation in 1953. Thaddeus Norton had seen the ledger 4 times. Jubal Whitaker had seen the ledger twice. Cleveland Sutphen had not seen the ledger. Nobody at the Bank of Yancey County had seen the ledger. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture had not seen the ledger. Ruthie Whitaker was by the autumn of 1972 the lowest per-head feed cost hog operator in Yancey County, North Carolina. And nobody in Yancey County knew it, except the woman who kept the ledger and the part-time hired hand who had been at her side for 4 years. She liked it that way. She told Thaddeus Norton in October of 1972, sitting on the back step of the farmhouse after evening chores with 2 enamel cups of coffee between them, that she did not want the county to know what the operation was doing because the day was coming when the county would have no choice but to find out. She told him that her great-grandmother Sally had warned in 1923 that the commercial feed bins were going to run dry and that she was going to be ready when it happened. Thaddeus Norton had set his coffee cup on the step. He had looked at her for a long time. He had said, "Mrs. Whitaker, I have known you for 4 years, and I have not understood you for 4 years, and now I think I am starting to." She had said, "Thaddeus, you have understood me from the morning of October 19th, 1968, when you stood at the end of the borrowed stock trailer and helped me walk 40 guinea hogs off the ramp into the lower woodlot without telling me I was making a mistake." He had said, "Mrs. Whitaker, I knew you were not making a mistake. I just did not know what kind of right you were going to be." She had said, "Thaddeus, neither did I." In the winter of 1971, Ruthie received a letter from a researcher at North Carolina State University in Raleigh named Dr. Lavinia Crockett. Dr. Crockett was an associate professor of swine science whose research program focused on heritage breed hog production economics. She had read about the Whitaker operation in a brief, unsigned North Carolina Cooperative Extension newsletter article that had described an unnamed Yancey County hog operator running a documented guinea hog rotational pannage protocol with measurable per-head feed cost reduction. Dr. Crockett had written Ruthie a letter on January 22, 1971, asking whether Ruthie would consent to a multi-year research collaboration. Ruthie had answered 4 weeks later. She had said yes. She had said, "Don't use my name," said yes. She had said, "Don't use my name." Dr. Lavinia Crockett kept her promise. She visited the Whitaker operation every April, June, August, and October from 1971 through 1977. She documented the rotational pannage forage pressure curves, the herd genetics, the natural farrowing rates, the seasonal feed cost structure, and the small-scale heritage hog woods pannage economics. She published, between 1973 and 1977, 5 papers in the Journal of Animal Science and Heritage Livestock Quarterly that referenced the Whitaker operation only as Cooperator W. None of the North Carolina commercial hog operators identified Cooperator W until the spring of 1974. Then the 1973 to 1974 commercial hog feed cost crisis arrived. The 1972 Soviet wheat purchase episode, which had been quietly negotiated through the New York commodity exchanges in July of 1972, had drawn down American hard red winter wheat and corn and soybean stocks by approximately 80% over the second half of 1972. The Department of Agriculture had announced the cumulative volume of the Soviet purchase in October of 1972. Corn spot prices on the Chicago Board of Trade had risen from approximately $1.40 per bushel in October 1972 to approximately $2.30 per bushel by April 1973, to approximately $3.40 per bushel by January 1974. Soybean meal spot prices on the Memphis market had risen from approximately $110 per ton in October 1972 to approximately $310 per ton by the time of the Nixon soybean embargo of June 1973, which had been a 5-day federal embargo on U.S. soybean exports announced on June 27, 1973, in response to runaway domestic soybean prices, and to approximately $410 per ton by January 1974. The combined effect on the commercial confinement hog feed ration was a cost per pound of live weight increase of approximately 220% in 14 months. The commercial commodity hog price at the same time had risen only modestly because the consumer pork retail price could not absorb the full feed cost increase. Commercial Yorkshire Duroc confinement operations across the American Southeast began emergency liquidation culling of breeding sows in early February of 1974 at 12 cents per pound dressed weight, well below the break-even cost of producing the sow in the first place. The Sutphin operation across the road from the Whitaker farm liquidated approximately 140 breeding sows over the 8 weeks between February 5th and April 1st, 1974. The other commercial Yancey County confinement operations followed within the same window. The Whitaker rotational pannage operation continued exactly as it had for the previous 5.5 years. The herd grazed on the autumn 1973 hickory mast accumulation on the upper woodlot rotation through February and into March of 1974. The autumn 1973 white oak acorn drop had been a strong mast year on the Black Mountain Ridge. The supplementary cracked corn finishing ration for the late winter window had been pre-purchased at the September 1973 commodity corn price of $2.70 per bushel and was stored in the Whitaker farm cribs. The 1974 spring farrowing season opened on schedule with the lead sows farrowing in late March. Within 7 weeks of the regional commercial hog emergency liquidation crisis, Ruthie Whitaker's farm telephone was ringing every working hour. The first call came on the morning of March 11, 1974, from a Knoxville, Tennessee specialty grocer who had been carrying small-scale heritage pork at retail for 9 years, and who had been unable to source any commercial heritage guinea hog dressed weight for the previous 14 months. The Knoxville grocer offered Ruthie a 1-year supply contract at $3.20 per pound, dressed for 4,500 pounds annually. Ruthie told him she would think about it and call him back. She walked the upper woodlot for an hour. She returned to the kitchen telephone. She told the Knoxville grocer she could not commit to the contract because she had a more important arrangement to consider first. The second call came on the morning of March 14, 1974, from an Atlanta Italian-American charcuterie buyer named Augusta Marcellus, who had been operating an Italian-style cured meats establishment under the name Marcellus Cured Meats and Charcuterie at the Atlanta Municipal Market in downtown Atlanta since 1959, and who had been searching for an authentic American heritage breed hog supplier with the proper fat profile and slow-grown muscle structure for European tradition prosciutto-style and salumi-style cured meats for 15 consecutive years without finding one. Augusta Marcellus had read a brief, unsigned North Carolina Cooperative Extension newsletter article in February 1974 that had described an unnamed Yancey County woods panage hog operation untouched by the regional feed cost crisis. She had contacted the Cooperative Extension Office for the operator's name. They had given her Ruthie's name in spite of Dr. Lavinia Crockett's prior research confidentiality agreement, because the crisis had changed the calculation. Augusta Marcellus had called the Whitaker telephone from her Atlanta office on the Thursday morning. She had asked Ruthie whether the Whitaker operation could commit 18,000 pounds of dressed guinea hog annually for the next 5 years to the Atlanta charcuterie at a base price of $4.20 per pound dressed weight, 9 times the commercial commodity rate. The total annual contract value at full delivery would be $75,600. The contract was a 5-year exclusive supply agreement with Marcellus Cured Meats and Charcuterie. Augusta Marcellus drove from Atlanta to the Whitaker Gate the following Saturday in a 1972 deep burgundy Cadillac sedan DeVille with a small brown leather portfolio on the passenger seat and the folded contract inside it. She arrived at 10:30 in the morning on March 16, 1974. She walked through the split-rail gate. Ruthie read the contract 3 times. She wrote 2 questions in pencil in the margin. She asked Augusta Marcellus the 2 questions. Augusta answered both clearly. Ruthie signed the contract at 12:41 in the afternoon of March 16, 1974. Augusta Marcellus drove back to Atlanta that afternoon. The first dressed hog shipment left the Whitaker operation in late October of 1974. By the end of 1975, the Whitaker Woods panage operation was grossing approximately $91,000 annually against the Sutphin commercial confinement operation's projected zero. Ruthie expanded the breeding herd to 148 guinea hogs in the autumn of 1974 through additional purchases from Eldridge Caudle's son Truman in Watauga County. She hired Thaddeus Norton full-time as the operation's senior herdsman. She built 2 additional hand-cut locust post split-rail farrowing shelters in the upper woodlot. She began selling foundation guinea hog breeding pairs to other small-scale Appalachian and Piedmont and Hudson Valley operators in 1975 at a price of $75 per pair. The 1975 breeding stock sales generated an additional $11,000 in revenue. By the autumn of 1975, the operation was producing 20,000 pounds of dressed guinea hog annually for the Atlanta charcuterie contract, 3,500 additional pounds for direct Burnsville and Asheville farm gate sales, and approximately 30 guinea hog breeding pairs annually for the Rebuilding American Heritage Hog movement across the southern Appalachian region. Cleveland Sutphin drove over to the Whitaker farmhouse on a cold Saturday afternoon in late November 1975. The 1975 dressed hog shipment year had been a record. He parked his truck at the gate. He walked through. He walked across the gravel yard to the lower farrowing shelter door. He looked in through the open door. He saw the deep, clean wheat straw bedding, the hand-built oak feed troughs, the small, jet-black guinea hog sow settling onto the bedding for the evening with her litter of 9 small piglets clustered against her belly. He looked back at Ruthie, who had walked out from the kitchen with a small tally book in her arm. He took off his faded green Funk's G hybrid seed ball cap. He set it against his chest. Ruthie, Cleveland. I have been thinking about Bertram. I have been thinking about what I should have said in October of 1968 when you walked the first 40 guinea hogs off the borrowed stock trailer into the lower woodlot. I am here to tell you that I know it now. I should have known by the autumn of 1972 when your per-head feed cost ledger came in below $12 and mine came in above $60. I did not know because I am the kind of man I am. I am not asking forgiveness. I am asking if I can come stand at this gate one Saturday afternoon a season and learn what I should have learned in 1968. Ruthie unlatched the gate. She held it open. She said, "Cleveland, you are forgiven. You were forgiven on the night Tibby sent you over here in October of 1968. You did not need to come today." "I did need to come today, Ruthie." "Then come walk the woodlot." He came in. He walked the upper woodlot with her for an hour. He looked at the 148 Heritage American guinea hogs rooting hickory mast in the leaf litter under the upper hardwood section. He took the small tally book from Ruthie's hands. He read 3 pages of her 1975 per head feed cost entries. He gave the book back. He drove home at dusk. The next Saturday he came back. The Saturday after that he came back. By the end of November 1975 he had come back 4 Saturdays in a row. The Saturday visits became, in the Sutphin and Whitaker families, a thing that was understood and not discussed. They continued until Cleveland Sutphin's death in 2001. Cleveland Sutphin learned on those Saturday afternoons the things he had refused to learn for 7 years. He learned that the rotational woods pannage protocol on the hardwood forest mast cycle could carry 148 breeding guinea hogs on a 60-acre hardwood woodlot at a documented purchased feed cost per head of less than $15 annually. He learned that the guinea hog dressed carcass fat profile and slow-grown muscle structure produced an authentic European tradition prosciutto and salumi cure result that the standard commercial Yorkshire Duroc carcass could not approach. He learned that the per-acre annual net profit of the rotational pannage heritage hog operation on direct market specialty pricing was approximately 17.3 times the per-acre annual net profit of the commercial confinement Yorkshire Duroc operation on wholesale commodity pricing. He learned, finally, that he had been wrong about everything, and that the woman who had been right was the same woman whose late husband he had hoped to inherit an 80-acre Blue Ridge foothill operation from. He told his wife Tibby, on the Saturday evening of November 29, 1975, after walking the upper woodlot for the 4th consecutive Saturday, that he was going to revise his will to leave the 70 acres adjacent to the Whitaker north boundary to Ruthie Whitaker at no cost in the event of his death, so that the Whitaker operation could expand the rotational woodlot without ever having to negotiate an arm's-length real estate transaction with his estate. Tibby Sutphin had set down her sewing. She had said, "Cleveland, that is the first decent thing I have heard come out of your mouth since the night I sent you over there in October 1968. He had said, "Tibby, I am trying to deserve to call her my friend." He had revised the will the following week. The 70 acres transferred to the Whitaker operation in 2001. The Asheville Citizen-Times ran a feature in its November 28, 1975 edition under the headline, "The 40 Hogs That Outlived the Feed Crisis." The article was 12 column inches on the front page and continued for 16 more inside. Thaddeus Norton was quoted. He said, "I worked beside Mrs. Whitaker for 7 years. I knew the woods pannage was right by 1971. I should have spoken up then. I am sorry I waited until the Soviet wheat purchase." Hosea Green was quoted. He had bought weanling pigs off Caleb Whitaker in the 1950s. He said, "I knew Caleb. I knew his grandmother Sally. I bought a sow off Sally Whitaker in 1939, and she gave me 4 good litters on a hardwood lot I had outside Spruce Pine." I will say this once. The great-granddaughter is what the great-grandmother was, and what the great-grandmother was the smartest hog raiser in 3 Appalachian counties. I am sorry I did not say so in 1968. Cleveland Sutphin was quoted. He said, "I owe my neighbor's widow my respect. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve to call her my friend." Dr. Lavinia Crockett at North Carolina State University was quoted. She said, "We have known about the Whitaker operation since the spring of 1971. Mrs. Whitaker asked us to keep her name out of the literature. We did. We are no longer going to." The Whitaker operation is the foundation of American heritage hog rotational pannage documentation in the United States. It is, as far as we have been able to measure, the lowest per-head purchase feed cost commercial hog operation in the documented Southern Appalachian small farm economic literature. It has been quietly run for 7 years by a single Yancey County widow on 40 animals her great-grandmother wrote about in a 1923 Farm Journal entry. The article noted in its final paragraph that the Whitaker rotational pannage operation had been the only Yancey County commercial hog operation to remain at full inventory through the 1974 emergency liquidation crisis, that the Whitaker operation had signed a 5-year exclusive supply contract in March 1974 with Marcellus Cured Meats and Charcuterie of Atlanta at a base price of $4.20 per pound dressed, and that the North Carolina Department of Agriculture had filed a formal request with the United States Department of Agriculture to recognize a permanent annual North Carolina Heritage Livestock Foundation Award category in honor of the 1974 Whitaker certification. The article did not note, because Ruthie Whitaker had not told the reporter, that the hand-bound 1881 Appalachian Goodwife's Receipts and Husbandry Journal her great-grandmother had begun on her wedding day in 1876 was still in use in the Whitaker kitchen pantry in 1975. That the 8 rotational woodlot quadrants on the home 80 acres had been the operational foundation of every farrowing and finishing cycle on the Whitaker place since 1970, and that the 40 heritage American guinea hogs Ruthie had walked off the borrowed stock trailer in October of 1968 had been the foundation of every dressed weight pound of authentic American woods panage heritage hog, produced in the southern Appalachian region for the next decade. By the spring of 1990, the Whitaker operation had become the foundation reference case in the rapidly expanding American heritage livestock conservation movement. 82 working southern Appalachian and Hudson Valley and Northern California heritage hog operations had adopted variations of the Whitaker rotational panage protocol. Between 1976 and 1995, 23 of those 82 operations had themselves gone on to be recognized in the founding Livestock Conservancy Directory, established under the Rural Heritage Breed Program of 1977. The North Carolina Department of Agriculture established in 1991 a permanent North Carolina Heritage Livestock Foundation Award named for the late Sally Caudill. North Carolina State University established in 1994 a small-scale heritage hog woods panage certificate program with Dr. Lavinia Crockett as its founding director. The Livestock Conservancy designated the American guinea hog as a foundation critical status entry in 1992, with explicit citation of the Whitaker heritage line. Thaddeus Norton stayed with the operation for the rest of his working life. Jubal Whitaker earned his degree in animal science from North Carolina State University in 1981 and returned to the home place in 1983 to take on the herd management side of the operation while his mother focused on the rotational woodlot system and the breeding records. Jubal Whitaker married an Asheville food systems researcher named Lucinda Greer in 1987. They had 2 daughters. The younger daughter, born in 1992 and named Sally in honor of her great-great-great-grandmother, learned to operate the rotational panage gate system at the age of 10. She is, as of this filming, the 5th generation of Caudill Whitaker women to keep heritage American guinea hogs on woods panage on the same 80-acre Blue Ridge foothill hardwood forest woodlot, going back to a Hancock County, Tennessee Mountain Hollow farm in the autumn of 1834. Ruthie Whitaker did not explain why she chose the protocol, not because the why was hidden. The why had been sitting in a Hancock County, Tennessee farmhouse kitchen in 1876 when her great-grandmother Sally had begun her hand-bound journal on her wedding day, and again on the porch of a Yancey County farmhouse in 1948, when the journal arrived from Hancock County in a small carved chestnut box, and her mother Iva had read aloud the 1923 entry that ended with the words, "Great-granddaughter, when the commercial feed bins run dry, the day will come when the family will need the old hardwood forest woodlot again." She farmed the home place for 23 more years. She ran the Marcellus cured meat supply contract from 1974 through 2000, renewing the original 5-year contract 4 times. By the end of her career, the Whitaker operation had grown to 150 acres of hardwood forest woodlot on the home 80+ the inherited Sutphin 70, and was running a working herd of approximately 300 heritage American guinea hogs across 12 rotational woodlot quadrants on the 8-week mast cycle. Marcellus Cured Meats and Charcuterie is still in business today, run by Augusta Marcellus's daughter Beatrice in a relocated shop in the West End neighborhood of Atlanta. The hand-bound 1881 Appalachian Goodwife's Receipts and Husbandry Journal is now on display at the North Carolina State University Animal Sciences Department Library in Raleigh. $200, 40 heritage American guinea hogs, an Appalachian Goodwife's great-granddaughter. The animals nobody wanted in the hands of the woman nobody understood until they saw what a 134-year-old Appalachian woods panage tradition would do when the commercial feed bins ran dry on the upper Southeast. If you have ever raised an animal everybody told you was the wrong one for your county, leave a comment below telling us what it was. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and ring the bell. There is one of these stories in every county in America. We are working through them, one harvest at a time.